I wanted to make sure that I was able to connect in. Well, thanks so much, Jill, for your presentation and also for hosting this meeting. And I'm sorry that I couldn't be with everyone in person. I'm here in Bonn, actually, at the UNFCCC Secretariat, but I wanted to make sure that I had a moment to speak to you. I have a PowerPoint, and I think I'll be able to show this. Are people able to see that? No, I think we have to share, right?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so you can see, hopefully. Yeah, you can still hear me?
Yes, we hear.
Great, thanks. Well, I just wanted to now pick up where Dilip left off and emphasize a few points, at least from ILO's perspective. And I know that Raphael, who I see there, I'm glad he was there in person, made a number of points, and hopefully I'll just take a bit more depth in some of them, but not too long. And I just wanted to show you a few slides. First, ILO has a long-standing commitment to the issue of recruitment, in fact, decades of these commitments. We have international labor standards on recruitment, not least of which is Convention 181, but others as well that apply, the Forced Labor Convention and so on. The issue of migrant workers has become a much more acute issue for us. We've now estimated there are 150 million migrant workers in the world, and we will have new global and regional estimates coming out this fall. But a significant portion are low-skilled workers, and they're the ones who are at risk of paying recruitment fees and high fees for their jobs. And what we have found through our research is that this significantly increases the risk of forced labor, debt bondage, human trafficking, and as Dilip has said, really puts migrants and their families into situations of which they may never get out. We estimate, too, that the costs are significantly high for the entire system. The costs of coercion, we found, are about 21 billion. In underpaid wages, it's almost 20 billion itself, 19.6 billion. Also, this is in US dollars. 1.4 billion is attributed to illegal recruitment fees. And some of the reason that this regulation is so poor is that there is a lack of oversight of recruitment practices, and with particularly migrant workers through corridors. So even if you regulate in one country, the country of origin, if you don't also regulate in the country of destination, nefarious labor brokers can take advantage of migrant workers. This limits the ability for labor market integration. It fosters low quality employment and exploitation. And we really aren't utilizing the skills and talents of workers, so they're often mismatched to their job. Maybe this was raised earlier, but we also have a strong link to the SDGs. And of course, that is the reason for this meeting. The indicator that we are trying to adopt a methodology for member states to carry out measuring recruitment costs as part of their SDG commitments. 8.8, 10.7 are both relevant, and I'm assuming that Raphael probably touched on those as well, but they really speak to migrant workers. 8.8 obviously includes migrant workers, and 10.7 includes the management of migration and recruitment costs. I wanted to point out that that ILO has adopted in tripartite processes general principles and operational guidelines for fair recruitment to address our commitments under the SDGs, but also to fulfill our implementation of international labor standards. And these have now been recognized in what governments have endorsed in July, which is the United Nations Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. And I think this is significant in that it establishes the commitment of member states to take this issue beyond just the SDGs, but to give it more life in Objective 6. Objective 6 is one of those objectives that calls for fair recruitment as a means to protect the rights of migrant workers. And it's linked to decent work. In fact, decent work is mentioned throughout the compact about 14 times. It calls on governments and shows their commitment to undertaking a number of areas, undertaking a number of programs and measures in a number of areas. And these include protection of rights of domestic workers, workers at all skills levels, a commitment to invest in skills development and recognition, qualifications, to ensure consular protections, to revise their labor laws and ensure that working conditions are appropriate and meet international labor standards, and address vulnerabilities of migrant workers, one of which is through the recruitment process. They're also committing to establish non-discriminatory social protection systems and social protection floors, and they recognize the important roles of trade union and employers and in taking a whole of society approach. Let me just focus on specifically what states are committing to on fair and ethical recruitment. They are supposed to undertake regulatory oversight, and that means that they will take action to regulate public and private recruitment practices and to align them with the international guidelines, and they mention ILO's fair recruitment guidelines, and to specifically prohibit recruiters and employers from charging or shifting recruitment fees or related costs to migrant workers. And again, they identify the key issues that ILO is concerned with: forced labor, debt bondage, and exploitation, among others. Yet there's no global consensus yet on measuring the cost of recruitment. And I wanted to point this out because I think your work in this area and the sessions today and tomorrow, but continuing, is particularly important to allow us to measure these costs in order to meet these commitments, both in the SDGs, but also in the new global compact on migration that member states have committed to implement. There is some urgency in their ability to have this ability to implement a methodology that would allow them to pursue those commitments. Objective 1 is also important because Objective 1 of the Global Compact is about evidence-based and collecting data and measurement. And there is a commitment to strengthen the evidence base on international migration and disaggregate that in a number of ways, but also by migration characteristics and in national contexts. There's a commitment to develop comprehensive strategies for improving migration data, improving comparability and compatibility of migration statistics and national data systems, and to collect, analyze, and use the data for the benefits of supporting the implementation of the SDGs. So I wanted to show you these two objectives because they're very much linked to work that you are going to be doing and assisting with. ILO is itself building the evidence base in a number of areas. In one, I mentioned earlier the global estimates on global and regional estimates on migrant workers that were put out for the first time by ILO in 2015 and now will be updated in 2018. We also have an International Conference of Labor Statisticians resolution that we've been working on since 2013 to develop statistical standards and guidelines for the first time that would help us examine and measure and collect data on and use as an evidence base that around migrant workers, since there has not been global consensus on that in the past. We expect that to be adopted in October, and I imagine that Raphael or has already mentioned that, or others will. So ILO is supporting the working group that developed it, and we hope that that's going to strengthen our work in the area of recruitment and measuring recruitment as well. So I wanted to add to what Dilip had said about the World Bank's findings, and you'll hear more about, I'm sure, the findings of the World Bank ILO surveys that have been undertaken. So I won't go into those details, but I thought this slide would be important to show you because in addition to recruitment fees and related costs, we examined the costs that are in terms of working conditions when migrant workers are paying recruitment fees and examining them in the context of what happens to them in the job that they find themselves in after paying these fees. And we see these linkages, which I think are quite startling. Salary losses. 24% of migrant workers experience losses due to wage problems. Either those were not paid that were promised, so contract substitution, or due to unforeseen deductions, which may be from, of course, paying debts around the recruitment fees. And in fact, we found 15% of the migrant workers did not receive their wages on time. There's occupational safety and health issues. 30% of migrant workers did not have a contract before they left. And in health-related problems, about 1 in 7 had serious related injuries, which was far above the national averages. Working time and rest was also of concern. 25% of migrant workers did not have a rest at least 1 day per week, and 71 working hours per week was about the average. And there are really large differences in gender among these findings. We have these in the reports that ILO and the World Bank have put out, and we've issued a special report through ILO that contains much more about these working conditions. But it also goes to show that it's not just the wages, it's not just the cost of recruitment and the fees that are paid, but what happens to migrant workers when they do pay those fees. We are measuring progress. This is the reason we're here at this meeting today in terms of 10.7.1. I know that Raphael has probably mentioned we will be presenting the guidelines not only in consultation with the NSOs, but to the IEG, SDG, and I believe it's in October. Let me end by just highlighting the policies that ILO thinks are going to be necessary in order to ensure that we can fully address recruitment costs. And of course, that begins with being able to measure recruitment costs, and that's where you're helping us a great deal. We believe that our standards are quite clear. There should be 0 recruitment fees and related costs for workers. We'll be having a tripartite meeting to identify what is encompassed with recruitment fees and costs in November. We believe that equal treatment also is fairly clear in our standards in employment and working conditions. We promote bilateral agreements to reduce influence of intermediaries in employment contracting, and I should say also multilateral agreements are going to be key with regional labor mobility. There's a need for an increase in labor market information, and we're not collecting enough data on that. And to provide more scope for direct recruitment between governments and take out the middle person, the labor brokers. We also are promoting transparency in our transactions and to minimize red tape and bureaucracy. In some cases, there are experiments with e-governance processes that can help do that. And we also think compliance and enforcement is going to be absolutely critical. So let me finish by saying that I wish you all a very successful 2 days of meetings. I know you have a lot more technical work to do, and I hope that at least with Dilip and I presenting some of the policy background and context, you will be more inspired or invigorated to carry out your work. And I want to thank you again for participating in this workshop and through this progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Maybe we should take, if anybody has any questions at this stage, you will have a lot of time to discuss very detailed, in detail, all sorts of issues. But any quick question to me or Michelle, you're still there, great. From the audience, I mean, anyone. Wonderful. So.